¿Qué tal amigos? ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos una vez más. El día de hoy tenemos una súper entrevista con Casper, que es parte del equipo de Polimec, una futura parachain en Polkadot que tiene que ver con lanzamiento de proyectos, levantar capital, preventas de alguna manera. Entonces vamos a estar platicando de todo esto y más. Hello, Casper. Welcome. Today, thanks for the time. We're going to be talking about Polimec. A project that he's been building for bits, and it's related to Polkadot, planning to be a parachain on Polkadot, focused on capital raising for projects that want to launch. Well, first of all, thanks for the time, and how are you doing today?
Very good, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak a bit more about Polymec, what we're doing, and what's going to happen in the next in the remainder of 2023 as well.
Amazing. I'm excited to hear about it. So first of all, I wanted to introduce you to the people. So maybe you can tell us what do you do in Polymec? What's your part in the team?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things being a co-founder is a bit that you're just doing anything and everything, I guess. So obviously my background is in finance and compliance, and also sort of that was also my entry into to blockchain 4 years ago, when I started out as a CFO for LBRY Foundation, and used 4 years there on both the launch of Kusama and Polkadot and the first years of adoption, and then one of the learnings there was as well that all this fundraising regulatory side, how there are so many ways of doing it, and I think it seems every single project sort of is trying to build their own thing to solve the problems that they have, or they go through some of these big centralized providers and pay them a lot of money to do something that essentially shouldn't really cost anything. So that was sort of where sort of the idea of how can we actually do this a lot better it came from, and then started to discuss the thing about Polymec in the beginning with Ingo from Kills Protocol, because as such you can say the genesis of Polymec came out of Killed in the beginning of a way of how do you do simple fundraisers. Then the whole regulatory side and so on is something that we put on afterwards, because we looked at it and say, sure, you can do a sale, but there's also a lot of regulatory pressure in the market right now. How do we actually assess those things, and how do we actually make a process where we can say we are mimicking the way of raising funds that regulators are also seeing of how are you segregating the different participants in different risk categories, and how do you make sure you have proper price discovery and so on. So yeah, I'm not a technical founder as such. Obviously, being involved in a technical project as Polkadot for 4 years, you pick up some stuff, but I wouldn't be the ones to sit down and write the lines of code, but I'm happy to discuss the general ideas of it at least.
Amazing. That's really interesting that you worked on the foundation, and I bet you have some cool stories about all the process that has been launching this Polkadot Kusama projects in the past years. But focusing more on Polymec, I want you to maybe describe for the people who don't know what it is, what's a general overview of the project?
Yeah, so generally it's a decentralized community-driven fundraising protocol. And I think what we also say is sort of like it's going into the realms of what we call regulatory compliant DeFi, because as such you can say it's definitely it's decentralized and it's financed, and we want to make sure that it's regulatory compliant. And well, I can continue to speak about this one for ages, but let's try to sort of boil it down to what is the key in Polymec is basically to make sure that we can make fundraising easier for everybody involved in the process. I think if you look at the fundraising landscape today, you probably have a triangle between you have the founders or the project that need to figure out they need to have time to build a project, and they need to raise some funds to do it, because building stuff on blockchain just takes a long time, and especially if you do build something that's quite complex, it will take some time before you actually have a working project. Then you have the whole institutional market, looking at let's say VCs or high net worth individuals, other institutions that are contributing to projects, and then very, very importantly, you have the entire community that also is, well, a lot of them are users and backers of the projects. And how do you make sure you put these three points together in a way that they actually support each other? I think one of the flaws we see today in the blockchain space is that you have a lot of projects, they just get funded by VCs. And then they are funded by VCs for 2 or 3 years, and then they need to go out and launch their project. And then they need to start building up a community. For us, it makes sense to actually start already from the get-go of like, hey, how do you build up your community as well? And I don't think there's a better way of doing that than enabling the projects to interact and get contributions from both the VCs and the institutionals, but also from the community very, very early on, so that everybody basically works together to make sure the project becomes a success on the long term. And there we are implementing different mechanisms how to solve that, and how to make sure you can actually do fundraising very, very completely decentralized, but also fair for the participants that actually are there. Because of course they have different roles to play. And that's sort of where, if you look at some of the major things in Polimec, is that we have the concept of evaluators. So evaluators being community members, which could be both in the general community, but it could also be VCs or institutionals that are assessing the projects. So that's one part that's really essential, because it's decentralized. So these are the gatekeepers for making sure that we actually have proper projects doing fundraising on Polimec. And then you go into the entire fundraising round and the price discovery, as well as the community round of making sure that you get the proper pricing for a project, but also making sure that the community get access to it. So I think the most important thing is to see this triangle and make sure that you can get projects that can get effective access to fundraising, do it really fast, but also get a lot of, probably majority of the funds from VCs and institutionals, but get your community in at the same terms as the VC institutionals, because they deliver the same value. It's a different thing, but they are as essential as getting the institutional in at an early stage.
Yeah, for sure, that they make them live in the long term, right? VCs just bootstrap the start when the project is born. To put in like a very vague way, maybe, would you describe maybe Polimec as something that was popular in the last market, like these things called launch pads? How would you differentiate for these things?
Yeah, well, I have a long speak about that, because we talked to quite a lot of people about this, and it's something that we're quite keen on making sure that Polimec is actually not a launchpad. I think launchpad has several flaws. I think usually launchpads are very centralized. So usually the model is you pay money to get in. You have a centralized committee deciding what's good and what's bad. And it's a bit of a black box. And usually you end up in getting community in at a very late stage, just before you go on the market. So the community get in at the very last minute before it hits the market. Fine, this could be good, but it's also it's slightly risky strategy. So in Polimec, it's much more essential to actually build a long-term relationship with the project all the way from pre-seed or seed until they go live. And in different stages of a project, you might actually want to do different kinds of fundraisers. You may leave more room for having VCs and institutionals in, less room for the community early on, because you don't have as much traction maybe on the project. But that is fully customizable on Polimec, so the project can decide what actually makes sense when they go through the different fundraisers. But the essential thing here is that it's completely without participation fees to participate for anyone on Polimec. The only cost there is that if you are successful in your fundraise, then a portion of the tokens in the project raising funds will be kept in the Polimec treasury and used to incentivize the participants subsequently, to make sure that all the fees that the project actually pays goes directly back to the community over time and help the project over time do a successful launch of their project. So for us, it's very much of making sure that we can enable easy participation and have a long-term relationship with the project and the community, and make sure that it's success for everybody. It's not just like, hey, you go in, you do a launch, and then you're out again. It's like that I think is the wrong model, and that might work in a bull market where everybody is going for it, but I think the whole sustainability over time, I think, is having the long-term relationship and making sure that you have incentives aligned between all the parties.
Nice. And you mentioned stages of these projects. What would you say is or what's Polimec want to focus more, like pre-seed, seed, Series A? Would you say that you're focused on one specific stage, or you're just accepting anything?
As such, you can say we are. You can say we don't want to decide. So we want to build the platform that the community can use and the project can use. So when I look at it, pre-seed and seed to actually be in there very early on is actually where, as a project, you can reap a lot of benefits by having an efficient process of doing it. Because if you've been out doing a fundraising round, I think there is a rule of thumb is that you need to talk to, I think it's 50 to 60 VCs to make sure you get funding. This takes a long time, and especially if you are a very technical team, it's like you might not want to use your time and effort on doing a lot of fundraising calls with a lot of VCs. So why don't you put that down into a fixed process on Polimec, making sure you can do it in as little as 45 days, and then you know for certain that you have run your fundraising round. So you don't have to end up using a lot of time on it, and then you can get back afterwards to building. So there, I think it should be really efficient for the projects to participate. And then, of course, depending on how much funds they need over time, then they can cater the different fundraising rounds directly on Polimec to make sure that it works very easy for them. And then, and I think that's actually a really good point for a lot of projects, is that you actually give this contribution token to your participants immediately, so the participants can see that they actually got something. So you get away from this notion of you sign a long contract and then you basically cross your fingers and hope you get some tokens at some point. Here you actually get an immediate proof that you participated, and then once the project is ready to go live on mainnet, then these tokens are directly exchanged for the mainnet tokens on the project. So you also don't have all the hassles of going through all kinds of claiming processes. That's fine. If you've been in crypto for years, you know a bit about it, and sort of you know that a lot of crypto is also pressing buttons and figuring out what works. But if you haven't been in there, then a lot of these claiming processes can be quite difficult. So all that complexity of the claiming process we also take out by actually making sure you can do that directly via Polimec.
And one question there, are this, what I've read, they're not, but these tokens pre-mainnet, they cannot be traded before the mainnet happens, or can they?
Yeah, so this is where we come into the regulatory topics, because there is the different regulators have different ways of looking at these things. But once you don't, as long as you don't have a project and you don't have a working product for your users, then this mimics a lot more of what I think regulators are looking at as being securities. So that's why how we are building it on Polimec is that once you have your contribution token, that one is locked on Polimec underneath your KYC AML credential. So there is a direct link between your KYC AML, your wallet, and what you have of your participation tokens. Then once the project go live, then there's a lot more utility, and you have a decentralized network, because when you're building, nothing is really decentralized, right? It's like I'm sure you can figure out to do it, but it's extremely difficult to start. You need to build something first to decentralize it and get it out to your community. So yeah, the tokens, once they are the contribution tokens, are non-transferable as it is right now. But of course, it's the beauty of building on Polkadot that if regulators change their minds at some point in the future, that you can start actually doing this. It could be even that you can start doing sales of these ones in a bit more of a regulated manner, since everything is kept under credentials. Mm-hmm. Then you could envision that at some point you can open up for doing it, but as it looks right now, then everything is ring fenced and non-transferable while they are on Polimec.
All right. And maybe a question that could be relevant to projects that want to launch on Polimec, because maybe for some projects, it is important to, they're all focused on raising money, raising capital, right? But for some, it's not the same to raise from one VC to another, right? They want to get the best quality ones, because a good VC doesn't just bring money, he brings connections, support, knowledge. So how about projects can choose like which institutions can participate or something in that road?
So yeah, it's something that we actually discussed with quite a few teams, and how we see it is the easy option there is that if you have one or two VCs that you talk to already, and they're big backers of your project, and you're saying, well, this is really important that they get in. Mm-hmm. On Polimec, we don't say we have to have the full everything that you fundraise needs to be done over Polimec. So if you have one or two VCs that you're saying these are really key for my project, of course you can do sales that doesn't go through Polimec. That's not something that you're bound to do through Polimec. What Polimec actually does is, since we have this auction mechanism for the VCs and institutionals, then a lot of it is obviously based on price. And I think what teams need to figure out is exactly sort of how do you make sure that you have the right combination between price and the value that your VCs are delivering. So as it is right now, it's not like you can sort of cherry pick your VCs. A lot of this is based on price, because the price is also what goes into the community round, to make sure that you actually get the best price discovery possible for the project, and make sure that this is a fair price that's done there. But of course, if you have a strategic important VC, or let's say you started out having one VC on board that helps you get off the ground before you do your pre-seed, of course that is something that you can do on the side as well, because that one is much more of a one-to-one interaction of the team and personal connections there, right?
Of course, yeah. And you mentioned right now price discovery. Maybe something really that investors take into account when investing is like the valuation of the project. So what I have read from the papers, the team who's raising chooses like a floor price for their token sale, but this can go beyond. So there's not like a fixed valuation for the project. Could that be said, or something like this?
Yeah, that's one of the key functionalities of what we're doing, and it's also a key to to make sure that there's fair participation for everybody. So when you do a fundraise on Polimec, after you've gotten your project evaluated, then there is a 5-day auction round. That auction round only has participation from institutionals, VCs, or high net worth individuals. And that is set up as a candle style auction. So everybody will bid, hopefully their best bid in the beginning, because they don't know when the auction actually ends up ending. But you want to make sure that you have the professional actors in the space to say, how much am I willing to pay for this? So the projects can put in like a floor price and say, I'm not happy if it goes under here, but as such, you can say the project doesn't know what the market evaluates their values their project for. So that's where we say that the professional actors should go in, do their due diligence, and come up with what do they think is a fair price that they're willing to pay. Then once you have that, then you go into the community round. And in the community round, the price is fixed at the weighted average of the auction round. So that means that the community will always get the weighted average of the price that the professionals are paying. Because otherwise you end up in these bit more, let's say, hype circles. We saw that in ICOs in 2017 and so on, that everybody gets FOMO and try to get into a project. That could risk that all of a sudden you get a very high valuation of your project, which means that then you have a very high mark that you need to live up to in expectations from all your community and participants. And there, I think it's much more fair that we have the professional actors that know that has more information, that can figure out what are they willing to pay, and then the community can get in on the same terms as the professional players.
Yes, of course. Definitely, like you said, there's a lot of hype in the bull markets, and valuations go crazy. Now that we had like a correction, valuations are getting into more normal grounds. But yeah, this mechanism is interesting because people pay what they think they should pay, right? Not what the team is forcing to pay, at least. One thing I wanted to ask you also is you mentioned like you have this like tokens that are created before, and then the mainnet tokens. Does that mean that the Polimec infrastructure is used only to launch a parachain, or it can be used to launch like a dApp on top of a parachain too?
So it can be used for a dApp on top of a parachain as well. And we are even looking at saying how can you do it even for anything in the Polkadot ecosystem, but obviously also looking at what can you do outside of the Polkadot ecosystem. So if you look at the different landscapes, I think it depends on what they're launching, but we are talking to some of the smart contract platforms on Polkadot as well, to make sure we can make it even easier. But any type of token issuance that we want to do on Polkadot would work with Polimec.
Nice. Yeah, that was a question. And you mentioned what teams, if you can say, are you maybe collaborating other parachain teams?
Yeah, so the first collaboration we have obviously is with Kill Protocol. This is a very key part of how we're making sure that we're regulatory compliant in making sure that we can use DIDs and verifiable credentials to make sure that we can have a trusted third-party issuer of KYC and AML credentials anchored on the Guild blockchain that can be used on Polimec. And yeah, I think that's like a very good example of like what can you actually do with interoperability on Polkadot, that you can have different parachains working together and building what they build great instead of having to build it all yourself. So that part I think is really, really important. Then we're also working together with Moonbeam of figuring out how do we tie into EVM based ecosystems as well, and make the Polimec accessible for those players as well. And of course, we're talking to quite a lot of other players in the ecosystems, especially like the smart contract platforms. How do we make sure we can integrate seamlessly with those ones? But also, how do we make sure that we can make participation as easy as possible for anyone on using Polimec? That's sort of the goal of how can we make it seamless interaction. You want to participate in a project, how do you make it very easy to participate without having to go through all kinds of hoops? So really talking to quite a lot of different players in the ecosystem to make sure that we can use the power of interoperability to make a really easy to use project for the end user.
That's great. Now that you mentioned Guild, I wanted to ask you actually about the origin story of Polimec, because I believe it was first going to be based inside of Guild or something like this, and then it kind of like became independent. Or how was Polimec born?
So yeah, Polimec was always seen as being its own parachain. Okay. But with the use case of Guild, with usage of Guild credentials used on Polimec. So the initial idea for Polimec was a way of how do you issue tokens, and how can you make sure that you do KYC AML on these things. So what we were looking at is this is in essence a really, really needed thing for the Polkadot ecosystem. But what we're also looking at is the entire like regulatory framework of this is serious business, right? Because it's people are participating in projects. You want to make sure that this is run as good as possible, but also making sure obviously that you have the right the right functionalities on the network to make sure that it's successful also long term. So what we were looking at with Guild was making sure of the initial idea is really good, looking at the regulatory landscapes and what is necessary for do successful fundraising. Let's build more things on top of the original idea. So that was sort of where we came from, the first iteration of Polimec to the current iteration of Polimec, of actually adding a lot of functionalities on top of the initial idea. So you can say it has just become a more deep project with much more functionalities on that, where it makes sense to actually have a dedicated team to make sure that this could go live. So as such, the initial setup and the initial how Guild works together with Polimec is completely unchanged. But now you can say we basically have since we have a dedicated team now, we are 10 people today on the Polimec team working on it. Then we can really push the narrative of Polimec out and make sure also that we can get a lot of usage of the credentials and the use cases of what you can actually do with interoperability between Polimec and Guild.
Well, I think that's great because I remember many of the Polkadot projects used this centralized uh, token sale platform, but the perfect where we're trying to go is decentralized. So I think that's a great add-on to the ecosystem for sure. I wanted to ask you about how does Polimec look for a regular person? You told us about there's three kinds of people who can participate. It's like uh, retail, regular persons, professional and institutional investors. How does a regular person can start participating in this token sales capital raises in Polymac?
So it's actually very, very simple. We're really keen on building a user interface that's going to be as simple as possible, and there are no ways of gatekeeping in Polymec. So the only thing that you need to be able to participate is you need a valid KYC AML credential issued by a third party on the guild chain. Then that you will use that plus Polimec tokens to be able to participate either in evaluation or participate in the fundraising round. So there is no prerequisite or anything else to be able to access. There's no like, you need to have participated in all these kinds of things before or anything like that. It's purely you get your credential. Once you have your credential, you are able to start looking at the documents and the information about the projects wanting to raise funds. Then you can use your Polimec tokens to do evaluations. So there you can, if you think the project is going to be successful in their fundraise, you can bond your Polimec tokens. If you're right and the project has a successful fundraise, you'll get rewarded in the project token. If you're wrong, then we will take away a part of the bonded Polimec tokens. So there needs to be proper conviction that this is going to be a successful fundraising, because this is like the decentralized due diligence mechanism. So you want to make sure that you actually have the community coming in and giving their view on what is a good project or not. And there we want basically as many participants as possible to do it. It's a bit of, you can say, wisdom of the crowd, because every single individual will have different ways of evaluating a project, and they have different backgrounds of how to evaluate it. So you could be a very tech-savvy person, and then you evaluate probably the code, or if there's an accessible GitHub, you can go through the code. If you're more into the tokenomic side of things, then you can evaluate that. So you can do that and show your evaluation directly on chain. What you can also do is that you can link your evaluation to your social media profiles or similar, and actually publish your due diligence. And then the community can decide if they think this is good or bad, or if they follow the evaluation or not. Then when you want to participate in the actual fundraising round, you also only need the credential, and the credential is split up in these three different categories of institutionals, high net worth individuals, and the community members or retail. And there you, for participation and for in crypto projects, you are always participating with any token as such as possible over time, but you cannot use your Polimec token. The only thing you use your Polimec token to is to bond for the amount that you want to participate with. And then what we see being the first tokens you will participate with is probably going to be stable coins, because you want to have a stable currency to invest into projects, and then your Polimec tokens only used to determine how much you can actually participate with, depending on how many Polimec tokens you have, and obviously depending on what kind of ticket sizes does the team allow in the different fundraising rounds.
Okay. So how much people can invest depends on how much tokens they have, even if they're professional, institutional, or retail. It all depends on how many tokens, Polimec tokens they have.
It depends on how many Polimec tokens they want to bond for the specific fundraise, and then it depends a bit on their on the different credentials that they have.
Okay.
So what we are allowing is that we are allowing the professional actors to bond less tokens for the token sale, but what happens is that they have to bond it for a longer time. So what that mechanism is actually doing is that you want to make sure that that depending on the knowledge level of the people that are investing, then you want to make sure that the professionals they have a possibility to take larger risks on individual projects, where when you come into more of a retail environment, you want to make sure that they take at more differentiated risks on several projects instead. So an example could be that if you are retail and you have $1,000 worth of Polimec tokens, then you can participate with $1,000 in a fundraise. But those are only locked up for the period of the fundraise, which is these 5 days. Then you get access to your Polimec tokens again. That's if you are VC, you can also participate in the VC round and say, I participate with $1,000 and I lock up 1,000 Polimec tokens. But what they can do is they can also say, I'm participating with 1,000 Polimec tokens. I can, let's say, leverage them 25 times, so I can actually put in a bid of 25,000 in any kind of stablecoin. But that means that instead of being locked up for a short period of time, then the lockup is multiplied by 25. So your Polimec tokens is locked up for a longer time if you want to if you want to use those again. So it gives the professional actors a bit of leeway in figuring out if they only want to participate in 1 or 2 projects, or if they want to participate in more, then they have to do it the same way as the retail community are. But if they want to chuck in $1 million in one project and then they don't want to do anything else, or if they want to go out and source more Polimec tokens to participate in the next round, then they are obviously able to do that. So it's a mechanism to show to make sure that that everybody is taking risks that matches their knowledge and their amount of capital to deploy.
Of course. And how many projects can be raising capital at the same time at Polimec? Is there like a limit?
I think the limit is actually more of a technical one of how many can you actually have running at the same time. So as such, that more depends on how many can you have running on the chain at the same time. There is no, as such, if you want to have 3 or 4 running at the same time, it's not as such. It's not something that we put a limit on. It's more of a technical limitation, but also obviously on the project raising of like, do you want to try to run another fundraise on top of 3 others? Maybe you want to push that maybe for a week out or something like that, just to make sure that you spread it out a bit. But we don't put any limitations on. The only limitation there is would be on the technical side.
The projects choose when they want to start it, and well, the time is predetermined, right, for the race?
It's fully, since we are looking at Polimec as software we put out there, it's fully decentralized. We don't have control over when people want to start a fundraise. It's as soon as they have what we call an issuer credential. So that's basically a KYC credential of the entity that is doing the fundraise, and they upload documents. It goes through the evaluation round, and then it goes to the fundraising round. So they have completely power over when they want to start that process.
Nice. And you were mentioning a few times credentials. Can you explain how people get credentials and what requirements they need to get those credentials? Like, ID, like certain age, what documents they should need maybe to get those credentials?
Yeah. So in the end, you can say it depends a bit on the provider of the credential. What we are working with the provider of the KYC credentials right now is that we want to make sure, and I think this is really important, that you have a high quality KYC credential that is also accepted by, let's say, financial institutions and so on. Because if you want to have the highest quality, but you obviously also want to make it as easy as possible to participate. So think about it as usually when you go through a KYC process, it's mainly a matter of an ID, like a proof of residency, and usually there is some kind of this liveness picture involved as well, of making sure that you can identify that it's actually the real person, a person behind it. But as such, it's not like you need to have a lot of other documentation. So look at it from a way of when you are usually participating in a more of the sales that's been before, and you do KYC. What are the things that you usually use there, especially on, let's say, if you look at some of the, what you call them, neobanks, like you want an account at Revolut or Robinhood and so on, you need to provide certain documentation for KYC. It will be the same thing here.
Nice. And
the good thing actually to add on it is the KYC on Polimec is something, and the issuer right now we're talking to is looking at doing this on more of an ongoing basis. So you don't do KYC every single time you want to be a part of it. So you do KYC once, and then that credential is valid for a longer period of time. So let's say it could be a year, or it could be more than that, where you don't have, every time you need to go in and want to participate in a sale, you don't have to do KYC over and over again. You've done KYC once, and then you have it for a period of time, and can be able to participate in all the fundraisers that happens on the Polimec.
And since this credential is based on Kilt, it could be used outside of Polimec too, right? If I'm correct.
So as such, you can say the credential is based on our assessment together with the partner of like, hey, what is necessary and what you need to have. But if you have other projects that basically wants to use the same thing, then you can reuse that credential. The major thing here is that the credential is synonymous. So what you will be able to see on chain from the credential is that you will be able to see who's the issuer of it. So anyone that actually wants to reuse the credential needs to understand, I can understand what the credential is, like what are the type of credential it is, and do I trust the issuer of it? If I trust the issuer of it, then you can obviously use that on other chains as well. Yeah.
Nice. And one last question before starting to wrap up. I wanted to ask you about do the projects that are raising the money just get all the money right after they finish the raise, or they have to maybe complete milestones to get like the money delivered to them?
So it's something that we discussed, and how we build Polimec is that you will get access to the funds as soon as you completed the fundraise. It's when you do an entire long fundraising or different stages of fundraising, then it's for a startup that is sort of it's startup life is a bit highly uncertain, and a lot of things can happen, and it's definitely not it's never going to be any kind of linear path of like of building things. So I think the milestone approach works well for small projects. Let's say it's like a 1, 2, 3 months duration or something, and someone wants to build like a small a small product or something like that. But when you look at more of like a larger project with several people involved, then yeah, it's not going to be a linear process. There is full KYC AML on all the issuers. So obviously there will have to be of like, hey, when you're doing your due diligence, do your due diligence in a way of, do you think this team is actually able to deliver what they're promising? And you can say the team also have the possibility of saying, if I want to split up my fundraising in smaller rounds, I can do smaller rounds over time. But yeah, I think it's difficult for a startup where everything is so uncertain anyway, of having to adhere to that. Let's say your backers needs to decide if you can get the next tranche of funds, because yeah, something went wrong, or it wasn't exactly how to plan, and then you need to use a lot of resources and figuring out how do I then bridge the gap until I can get the next tranche released. So I think we see it more of like, the projects needs to raise funds that is reasonable and that they can explain to their participants, and not just go out and say, yeah, we need 10 million, then we'll do whatever we want. Like obviously you need to be sensible. You need to be responsible towards your participant, because it's not it's not just a game, right? They need to deliver something.
Of course. And what's the current status of Polimec right now? What's the progress? What can we expect in the short and long term?
So right now, all the focus is on getting ready for launch. So
Okay.
expect to be able to do launch in Q3, Q4 this year. We announced, like, what is that now? A couple of weeks ago, that we completed the first milestone for the substrate builder program. So we're now working towards the second on that part. And what also is really important for us is actually going out and engaging with the community. So we want to go out and actually talk to all the builders out there, but also talk to all the community members, and as well also as to VCs and institutionals of how they can use Polimec, and also help teams of like, hey, how do they think about the process towards their first fundraising round? How can we help them in the meantime until the protocol is live later this year?
Amazing! I'm excited to participate, and I think the due diligence, the evaluators part is really great, because it seems that many people trust the due diligence of sometimes other VCs, and we've seen that maybe they don't even do it. So I think it will be great to outsource this to as many people as possible, right? That would be interesting result, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know if you want to add something else, and maybe you can add also where can people find more information about Polimec if they wish.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess just to wrap up maybe on the evaluators, because I think it's really key to what we're doing. That I think what is really powerful is that it actually doesn't really matter if you are like a big VC or you are someone sitting in a room somewhere. It can be anywhere in the world, but if you have insights, you have a possibility to participate, and you can show that insights to the rest of the community. So I think that's really powerful, and that you end up with having something where fundraising becomes much more accessible and transparent, and that you don't have all these like maybe we don't have all the information on utilizing Polimec. Then you know that all the participants have access to all the same information, so you're really minimizing the information asymmetry that usually is there in these early stage fundraising rounds. As for more information about Polimec, definitely our website has quite a lot of information on it. We also try to be very active on especially our Twitter account with various blogs about the fundraising journey, and how Polimec can be seen in some of these inefficiencies that there is in the market. Then, as I said, we're also going out and actually want to engage with the community. So we are participating in .India in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
In next week, we'll also be in Paris, participating or not participating, but at least we'll be there at the hackathon in Paris as well to be to talk to the teams there. And yeah, then we also have, and we just launched that an ambassadors program. So anyone who actually wants to do a real deep dive into Polimec and be a part of the ambassadors program as well, should definitely reach out to us as well, and we can have a chat about how we can do that. Because for us, it's also making sure that we really put our efforts behind of this being a community-driven protocol. So we need to have a really broad spectrum in the ambassador program, and making sure that we have a lot of people out there that even can get a much deeper tech dive. So what we're doing with the ambassadors is also that we do have ongoing you call it educational sessions about what's going on at Polimec. How can you think about things? How can we work together on things? And make sure that they also get the latest news and developments on what goes on the Polimec side.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Casper, so much for your time. I think it was great. I could keep asking you millions of questions, but let's leave that for next time when you follow up with some upgrades on Polimec near to the launch. Thank you so much.
Will be a pleasure.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.